Good evening. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are
the Dungeon Dudes. There, we nailed it.
Nailed it. Yes. Getting the remote format from Lockdown World real down.
Yeah, it's working for us. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our monthly Q&A. We are the Dungeon Dudes. If you are unaware, we create D&D content that you can find on YouTube. We release new videos for Dungeon Masters and players every Tuesday and Thursday. And you can also check out our live stream, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, Shadows of Drakkenheim, Untold Tales of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. And if you're joining us here, welcome. Thank you for hanging out with us. Happy Friday. We're going to be answering some questions from our patrons, and we're going to mix in some questions from the chat as well. So while we're going on this, after each section, I might ask for some questions from the chat, and please start your question with capital letters, the word question, so that Monty or I can grab it and put it into our list. Monty, what are we chatting about tonight?
Well, this is our character building workshop. So once every couple months for our Q&A theme, we just do a general character building workshop where we take any questions that you might have about creating backstories, building characters, whether it's the role playing or the mechanics that go into characters, whether you're a DM wondering about character related concerns for character building or a player. We kind of do this grab bag of fun character building questions, and we might talk about everything. Tonight we got some particular questions about the new options in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. We have some great questions about character creation, particularly in relation to backgrounds, and then some cool questions just about specific build options and how to visualize some certain character concepts. So we're going to take those questions that our patron supporters have sent us. If you don't know, we have an amazing Patreon community that you can find at patreon.com/dungeon_dudes. As part of that, we have this awesome exclusive Discord server for all of our patrons where you can chat with us, join us for our monthly writers room, and submit questions for these Q&As. So we've got about 30 or so questions from our patrons. We had a couple duplicates this time that we're going to take in. We're going to try to get through as many of those as we can and intersperse those with a couple questions from the chat as we go. With that, Kelly, shall we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start off with some of the questions involving Tasha's, because there was a nice little section of questions here, and Monty and I have been digging our teeth into Tasha's over the last couple months and getting nice and comfortable with what we love and what we don't love. So let's start off with a question from Giraffe. Nice name. I love giraffes. Which Tasha's subclasses stand out to you? Specifically, how do you think the Rune Knight stacks up against the Battle Master? Two questions in there.
Yeah. So, Kelly, pick two. What two Tasha's subclasses stand out to you?
I'm super interested in the Swarmkeeper Ranger. I just keep going back to it. It sounds really, really fun. I have so many weird ideas. Actually, Jill and I were texting today about various concepts for what could work for a Swarmkeeper Ranger. And also, I'm really into the Twilight Cleric. It's one of my favorite ones. It sounds really cool and really powerful as well. What about you?
Ditto on the Twilight Cleric. I guess the Eloquence Bard doesn't really count, even because it can't, and beyond that, next week I'm playing a Clockwork Soul, so go figure.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that stand out. As far as how the Rune Knight stacks up against the Battle Master, it seems a lot of people are excited about the Rune Knight. I'm not. I would rather play a Battle Master. That's just me personally. It seems like there's some really cool stuff in here that's really unique and has some great flavor and some power behind it. It's not actually one of the ones that excites me personally, although I think a lot of people really are excited about it. I don't know. I just don't think it touches my heart.
I will say that I actually really like the two fighter editions that were offered. I do think the Rune Knight is really cool. I've looked at it a few times. Do I think it's as powerful as the Battle Master? I'm going to tentatively say no, but I haven't played a Rune Knight yet. Or I saw Nate played one in our last Untold Tales, but he was a multi-class, and we only got to see a glimpse of a couple
Yeah,
abilities.
yeah, it was hard to assess based on that actually.
So for me personally, it's hard to compare. Like we saw Pluto Jackson for a million hours of D&D prove how cool a battle master is. And on paper, I haven't fully analyzed it yet, but I think it's a pretty cool option. And I need to look at it a lot closer and analyze a few things before I make a final call. But I'm going to say that Battle Master, I think, still comes out on top currently.
Yeah, so actually, Adam P asked which Tasha's classes have we each tested so far, and which ones were we surprised by, positively or negatively. So far, we've seen in actual games, we've seen the Rune Knight and the Fey Wanderer. I feel like we didn't get enough with because Nate multi-classed those. I feel like we didn't see enough of their higher level abilities. You played a Scribe Wizard, and I'm going to be totally honest, the character was great. I was thoroughly unimpressed with the abilities, but we really didn't get too much in the way of combat till the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, we've had a lot of workshopping around some eloquence bards as well in some of our games, and I think coming down the line we're going to see like obviously I'm going to be playing the sorcerer, and I think lined up coming close we have perhaps a soul knife.
I think
that's what
so.
It's called, right? The rogue soul knife.
Yeah.
So those are some of the ones that we have coming down the immediate pipeline. And then we've tried out a couple of the ones that were already in the tank for a while that were kind of the subclasses added on there. So we'll see. We're still really early in the process, which is why you haven't seen us do the subclass tier rankings on the Tasha's subclasses yet, because honestly, for me, we're very early in that process. The jury's still really out on it.
Yeah, I can tell you that in terms of playtesting, Untold Tales is going to be kind of our playtest playground. So if you're watching our Untold Tales, you've seen me play a Scribe Wizard. I'll agree. I still stand by what our original take on the Scribe Wizard was back when Unearthed Arcana came out. And that is that I love the abilities given to the Scribe Wizard, but I think all of them should be feats or magic items that could be available for all wizards. A sentient spellbook should be a magic item that a wizard could get. A magic quill should be a magic item that the wizard can get. The ability to change spells from one type to another type should be a feat that a spellcaster could pick up. That's just my opinion. I like all of those abilities, but at the table, I felt like I didn't get to use any of them as much as I wish I could have. I was really looking forward to switching up damage types, but it ended up not actually coming up and not being relevant for me. And the Sentient Spellbook I used a little bit, and I found clever ways, and I think there are some fun ways to use it. But meanwhile, I've built an Eloquence Bard. I've built a Wild Magic Barbarian. I've built a Swarmkeeper Ranger, a new Beastmaster Ranger, Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, and I've been analyzing them as I go, and a Twilight Cleric, and all of them are pretty exciting in the building process.
Yeah, those are some of the standouts. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the Tasha subclasses. I have trouble remembering all of them still because there's such a long laundry list of lots of stuff that I want to play.
Yeah.
And I do have to say, for me, the Twilight Cleric, Eloquence Bard, and the Clockwork Soul excite me the most, and so most of my attention has been on those.
Yeah. Stephen J asks, from a DM perspective, what extra options in Tasha's do you think are important to allow for players? Example, allowing all sorcerers to get their extra spells as spells known, as opposed to just the new sorcerers.
I don't think there's any that I wouldn't allow.
Yeah, I honestly, I think that all of the new rules and tashes are great. I have zero issues with any of them. We've only got to try out a few, but every class that you read, the optional rules and things like that, it's pretty awesome. And I love the versatility. And I think versatility is good. The whole point for me of D&D is customization. I like customization.
I'm not opposed to retraining, and when new books come out, generally I try to give my players an opportunity to make some tweaks and integrate some of the new things that came out in the book, because it's new, shiny, and people get excited about them, and I want to see them in the game. There is nothing in Tasha's that I would even remotely consider banning, or that I would even remotely consider overpowered or broken. Like, no, there's a couple of the magic items maybe that I would be conservative about giving out as treasure, but as far as the player options,
there kind of is a second question hidden in here about allowing all sorcerers to have an expanded spell list, and I actually think that would be a great idea. If you're in our Discord a little while ago, we were speccing out. I was making up a expanded spell list for the Shadow Sorcerer. And I actually think it would be cool to add in an expanded spell list for all the other sorcerers who don't have one, because I think that actually adds a lot of value to the sorcerers that are in Tashes.
Yeah, there's been some cool discussion about, like, you know, how do you differentiate all the dragon sorcerers? Because do you make a list for every single one of them?
Yeah.
And, like, what do you do with the wild magic sorcerer? Like, should you roll randomly to see what extra bonus spells you get? So there's some cool discussions on there. I think that if you wanted to homebrew that with your group, I don't think you would break any of the sorcerer subclasses by giving extra spells to them. Me personally, I don't. Yeah. I just don't.
I don't. I think that since we've seen it now, it should be on all of them.
Yeah.
Robert G asks, how well does the Order of Scribes Wizard work mechanically, in your opinion? I'm always a huge fanboy of our robed int-based casters, and this one on paper just sounds so good, and I can't wait until I'm not the DM of my group to play it. As I already kind of answered, I love all of the abilities granted to a scribe wizard. I kind of think they could have been other things. But overall, I think that it's a valid wizard to play, and there are creative ways to use it. And I did enjoy the roleplay potential when I started imagining up what a scribe wizard might look like with his quill and all of that. The character I came up with actually ended up being far cooler than I anticipated. So have fun with the scribe wizard. There's a lot of fun to be had there. Do I think it's the greatest wizard? Not necessarily. There's several that I would say are more powerful, but it's in no way a bad choice.
On the flip side, I just want to say you could play a wizard that didn't have a subclass, and you might still be one of the best characters in the party, depending on what spells you pick.
Okay, fair enough. Like, I'm not going to have a bad time playing a wizard.
Yeah, like the wizard is one of those characters that I think, much like the bard and the cleric, I think your choice of spells has a much bigger impact on how your character plays and how much enjoyment you're going to get out of that character than anything your subclass gives you. The spells are the class is kind of just like you know how, like, nacho chips are just a vehicle for the toppings, right? Yeah. Like, you know, like, yes, nacho chips are good, but, like, the purpose of a nacho chip is to deliver cheese, meat, and jalapenos.
Did you actually just call them jalapenos?
In my household, we call them jalapenos on purpose. Yes, it's jalapenos, but I don't know. It's like, you know,
no, we all
I'd like 1,000 chicken fajitas, please. Right. So, it's a delivery vehicle for the goodness that is magic. So have
good
fun.
Analogy. Yes, the wizard is a vehicle. No, the subclass is a vehicle for the delicious cheese that is the wizard, is what Monty is saying.
And in particular, emphasis on the delicious cheese.
Yeah. Yeah. Todd Seymour asks, with the Rune Knight fighter subclass in Tasha's, it seems like my halfling character can finally achieve the gargantuan size if enlarge is cast on the character after using the runic juggernaut ability. How would you deal with a gargantuan sized player character in general? This is one of those things that's, I can't believe somebody found this, and now it's like, I don't think this was meant to be in the game. Also, it seems like combining the Lucky Feet and Divination Wizard's portent ability with the Rune Knight would give the character so much control over dice rolls in combat. Todd, good job. You found some loopholes.
If it works, well, I mean, here's the thing. You're not a gargantuan-sized player character in general. You're a gargantuan-sized player character when you activate that ability and someone casts Enlarge Person on you, which lasts for a very limited amount of time. Right?
I think it would be hilarious.
It's hilarious, but like, you can already polymorph someone into a huge creature, and druids can wild shape into huge creatures as well. So once you get into very high levels of play, you can true polymorph into gargantuan creatures as well. So I actually don't think it's unprecedented. It's a cool combo. Two thumbs up if it works. But I don't think there's anything that you have to worry about dealing with, because it seems to me as it's a thing that can already happen anyways.
Yeah,
right?
if your campaign ends with your halfling character turning gargantuan and storming into the enemy base as a giant wall smashing monster, then that sounds like the best time ever at D&D. So go for it.
Yeah.
As for the other one that they mentioned here, I mean, we already know about the Lucky and Divination Wizards. Adding it with the Rune Knight, like, yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm sure a few people are going to play one, and a few DMs are going to not be happy about it, but some might love it. So go for it.
We do have a couple questions that have come through into chat. And I think we got an interesting question here that I want to highlight first. Ashley Jen asked, are the optional class changes in Tasha's better than the original abilities? Specifically, the cleric's ability to replace Divine Strike or Potent Spellcasting with Blessed Strikes. Does it depend on playstyle and the specific character, or is one better than the others? My Tempest Cleric just got to level 6 and can replace Divine Strike with Blessed Strike. Is it better?
I think we may have just come up with a new series of videos.
Well, the thing is that a lot of them, I think Ashley Jen's question specifically, the cleric ability is one of the few that replaces them, in addition to the ranger ones. I think the ranger ones are flat out better. Like, no contest, take the ranger ones for sure. But a lot of the other ones for a lot of the other subclasses, they're not a trade. You get them just in addition. Like, all the sorcerer new abilities, there's an ability that lets sorcerers spend sorcery points to reroll ability checks. You just get to do that. That's just added. You don't give up any character abilities for that power. There's another ability for rogues, the cunning action to aim. That's just a new option. It doesn't take away any of your existing options. So those ones are straight up upgrades. And in the case of the ones that are optional, I personally think Ashley Jen, for your specific character, I would have to know what else you're doing build wise. With the Tempest Cleric, the real big thing is whether or not you're going to play melee or not, because you might not want to give up the Divine Strike if you are actually going into melee combat. So think about think about that, right? That to me would be the turning point, is like, how much do you want the upgraded? Just whack with the hammer.
Let's take two more questions from chat, and then we'll jump into the next section. So if anybody has a question, right now's the time to jump in.
Yeah, we got a few. We got a few here. So we get this classic question a lot of, how do I and I want to just give a short answer on this, of Gambit GGWP asked, any advice on running big parties? I have a table of 8 PCs, and I think we've answered this question a couple times, but Kelly, what's the gist of our opinion on this?
The gist of the opinion is that you need to have the right expectations for a bigger table. The smaller your table is, the more unified and immersed of a table it's going to be. The larger your party is, you need to have more room for it to kind of just be a group of friends hanging out. There's going to be more chit chat. There's going to be more side conversations. There's going to be more to manage, and turns are going to take longer to go around. So just set the right expectations. If you're hoping for a really immersive, quick-paced, well-thought-out, role-played game, the smaller the number of players, the more you're going to get that in our experience. Can it happen with a larger group? Yes. I'm just saying that the percentage chance of it being a little looser happens, it grows bigger as you get more people at the table.
The fundamental reality of it is that the time is divided at best equally between all the players at the table. So you have a group of 8, divide 1 hour by 8 people, and so each person gets to play D&D for 7 minutes of every hour. That's the amount of spotlight time they get every hour. Then that's not even counting what the DM has. And in my experience, Dungeon Masters take anywhere between 50% and 25% of the playtime, because generally speaking, the Dungeon Master is always until you get that sweet spot where the players are playing off of each other. Players are almost always playing off the DM. So if you have a party of 8, one of the ways that you solve the party of 8 is that you as the Dungeon Master have to be on it, which means that you're actually taking up more time of the gameplay experience, which means that now the players are playing even less D&D, and they're spending more time watching other people play D&D and waiting for their turn to come up. So to me personally, I think, and this is actually my biggest, like, people rag on Critical Role. The biggest problem with Critical Role is normalizing a 7-8 person player table. Like, because Critical Role is a group of 7 players plus a Dungeon Master. And Critical Role has normalized the idea of a massive party, which is actually a big disservice. I really think that, like, once you get to the 4 or 5 people mark, that's when you really got to decide, are we going to play, like, what are the trade-offs that we're accepting? You're always accepting trade-offs for a big group.
Good question. I think actually that with that, we should probably jump back into the patron questions. We'll take more from chat in a moment. So if you have any questions, Monty, are you grabbing a few of them? And
I am grabbing them and pasting them into our collection. So
wonderful.
Yes, please continue to submit your questions. We'll try to stay on top of it. If you're wondering why I'm looking down, that's because I'm trying to get some questions in.
Awesome. So the next section of questions we're going to be looking at is about character creation and backgrounds. And Dan, the GW, asks, as a DM, how can you work to equalize spotlight and balance character class strengths, abilities, S tier versus C or D tier during character creation? And I do want to start by talking about the strength abilities, S tier versus C or D tiers, and balancing that. And Monty and I actually filmed an episode recently. It's going to be coming out next week that kind of dives into the nuances of enjoying your character regardless. And like, I'm not going to go into the whole episode, but what I will say is, when your players are designing their characters, if you see them choose something that we or another person on the internet has given a low ranking, you can let them know the reasons why it got that. But at the end of the day, if they respond with, no, I want my character to have this, that's fine. And I don't think a balance needs to happen. I think that everybody should play what's exciting to them, because if you're playing an exciting character, I actually find that helps the first part of this question, which is equalizing spotlight balance. And when everybody's into their character, when everybody is enjoying their character, you actually get a lot more of those sweet moments where the characters, the players are actually bouncing off of each other. And the spotlight balance seems to take care of itself the more people are enjoying getting into their characters.
Yeah.
Monty, maybe you have a bit more to add on to that, but that's my general idea.
I think the biggest thing is it comes into knowing your players and knowing their expectations and what they all want out of the game. I'm going to tell a story about a group that had 2 players where the 2 players both loved dealing damage. They both loved dealing damage, and in their mind, they were having the most fun when they were dealing the most damage. One of the players at the table was a really good min-maxer, but the other player was not. And that other player who, the fun of the gameplay experience was him rolling the big numbers, dealing a lot of damage. He makes a barbarian with a 2-handed weapon and is really excited about that. The other player makes a paladin with great weapon master, polearm master, and the Oath of Vengeance. Player B didn't take the feats, didn't play into the actual, like, how you build a barbarian to deal the most damage, but had come into that game experience thinking, I'm going to be the damage dealer, and then is disappointed because the other player at the table who uses the knowledge is actually the one throwing down like 50 damage turns. What do you, like, I actually don't know what you do about that, right? Do you tell the other player to tune it down, or do you tell the other player to crank it up, right? That's where you have to manage those sort of expectations and talk to the people in the group and figure out what is it going to be, because oftentimes people don't vocalize these things clearly with each other, right? Like, sometimes people don't say, I want to be the damage dealer, I want my character to be the awesome damage dealing badass of the group. And there are people who are actually disappointed when they're not the number one damage dealer of the group. That's a conversation that people should actually have. I think that the thing that people need to talk about in session 0 is, like, what is the fantasy of your character? What is the fantasy that you want to live out with your character? Because you want to make sure that the game is delivering on that fantasy so that you're not disappointed. And the game includes the campaign, the group, the dungeon master, and each other, all those elements. And any one of those things can be out of sync, and any one of those things can disappoint you. And that's the biggest thing, is, like, you can play whatever you want to play, but you have to take the steps to make sure in playing what you want to play, are you still going to be rewarded for doing that, or is something going to happen that's going to disappoint you despite it? Because nothing is worse than playing the character that you want to play and still being disappointed.
Yeah. Rob Van Eck asks, how do you see the new character backgrounds and subclasses fitting into session 0 conversations? Does this open the door for character creation with the DM being a second 0 session for campaigns? I actually think that, so when we're discussing character creation, I know that the conversation starts for us way before session 0. Everybody has an idea what they're going to play. We toss ideas back and forth. I usually submit a backstory to Monty. He gives me feedback on the backstory, suggestions on how to fit it better into the setting. And then after that, we have a session 0 where we all meet up and discuss our characters together and find the glue that ties the whole thing together. That's what we do in session 0, is here's the campaign setting. Here are the characters you all presented. How do they know each other? How do they fit into the campaign? Let's nail that down. But we only ever do one session 0, but the conversation is like a month long usually for us, of just back and forth with the character concepts and stuff.
I mean, you don't need to spend a month, but
no.
But having the dialogue be an ongoing thing is, I think, critical, and I think that also solves a lot of the session, like the stuff that Dan was talking about in the previous question. Of, like, the more you communicate clear expectations, the more you can solve things. And ultimately, you gotta listen to the players so much, because as soon as you as the dungeon master start making the executive decisions, that's when you run into the possibility that you're going to ignore what a player's wants out of the game and make it, and that's something that you want to avoid, right? Like, you actually want to try to be in tune with what your players want out of the experience, and what you want out of the experience too. And make sure that what you want out of the game is clearly communicated to your players, right? Like, if you want your players to have highly interconnected backstories that are highly connected to the world and highly connected to each other, you should just flat out say that. And if a player comes to you with a character concept that isn't going to gel with that, just be honest and say, you know what, I have a very particular vision for this campaign, and I don't really know how to make that fit within my vision for this. And if you say that in a not jerk way, now you can have a conversation that says, okay, well, how do we solve that? Like, how do we gel everybody's desires together? And like, it's not about anyone giving anything up. It's like something more advanced than compromise. It's like synthesis. It's the synthesis of ideas so that everyone gets what they want, because compromise sucks, because in a compromise, nobody gets what they want. What you want from your session 0 and your game is a synthesis so that you find the common ground so that everyone, the DM and the players, can have an insanely rewarding gameplay experience.
Yeah, just as a quick note to bounce off of that, I think every time I've created a character, the original backstory I present to you is not the final backstory. You always come back and then we collaborate and change elements to fit the campaign setting. And I, as a player, know that by doing that with you, I will be more rewarded for those points coming into play in the world you're going to be showcasing for us. So that's the synthesis is a good word to describe that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, you're not caving to the players, and the players aren't overruling the dungeon master. It really is an act of collaboration.
Yeah.
And that it's about sitting down on the pedestal with everybody and working together in a collaborative and group storytelling way, and it really yields such amazingly satisfying results. Walt Flood asks, I'm building a Lost Mines campaign to be followed by Storm King's Thunder for some new players. This is actually a classic campaign idea of starting with Lost Mines and rolling it into Storm King's Thunder. And I want to tie some of the characters towards potential areas in Storm King's Thunder. Any advice on how to do this for larger multi-phase campaigns like this one? I have some thoughts, but I want to know what you think, Kelly.
I mean, I always try to tie my players' characters into the campaign, and what I tend to do is, like in this example, I would read through Storm King's Thunder and take notes of things of importance, NPCs that are available for the players to maybe know, locations that are available for the players to know exist. And I might present these options to my player characters and being like, here's some background ideas, like on top of your background choice. Look at this list. And you know how some of the books at the back, like Out of the Abyss at the back of the book says, here's a list of ideas for bonds, I think it is, that tie you to the Out of the Abyss campaign. I think that's essential for any campaign. Forget the like bonds and ideals presented in the background. Sometimes they can be good for influence, but I usually also make a list of ones that are tied to the larger world that I hope to showcase. And then when I hear the characters come up with ideas on how they might relate, like, oh yeah, I was born in this town, but then I moved to Fandalen and I've only lived here for like a few months and it's my new home, but I used to live in X, Y, or Z from Storm King's Thunder. Then suddenly they care more about the larger world. And when the game evolves, they're going to start to recognize bits of their backstory. So I kind of just read through the module that I'm going to run and find the pieces to tie the characters in and give them to them as little bits.
Yeah. And I think the other thing as well is one of the really great things about Storm King's Thunder combined with Lost Mine of Phandelver is all you really need to do is make the players love Fandalen and that area, and then have the giants come along and threaten to destroy it. A really easy way to integrate character backstories into the campaign is to do it early, to give the players the opportunity before 5th level to make an impact on the world, to integrate their backstories, relationships, their bonds, and their ideals and have those be a part of the campaign really early. And then whatever external threat that you've imagined as a DM, just threaten to destroy it. It's a very simple model. We use it in our Red Hand of Doom campaign.
Yeah.
Make step 1, spend the first 5 levels of the campaign making your players fall in love with the campaign world and the players in it. Step 2, threaten to blow it up. And you will make your players care.
Yeah.
But you have to put in the time of making them love it. And that's what's really great about the Storm King's Thunder plus Lost Mines of Phandelver combo, is that you have it very, very naturally. By the end of Lost Mines, your players will care about Phandalin, and then it's just a matter of threatening to blow up Phandalin, and they will care.
Yeah. Jake asks, what things should you involve with your DM and what things should you just develop on your own? I don't want to bog down my DM with questions and storylines, but I also want to give him some material to work with when he needs it. I have a few ideas on this, but
go for it, Kelly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not about what you should or shouldn't share. In my opinion, you should share your whole character concept with your DM. For me, there's no reason to keep anything about my character secret, because anything I design for my character, I want my DM to know about so that they can weave a story out of it. What I would avoid is I have a tendency to write really in-depth backstories, but I try to make them as to the point as possible so that I'm not sending Monty a huge document that was like once upon and like goes on this like epic adventure of my backstory. I add in the compelling points that's like, my character grew up here, was influenced by this, dealt with this, ended up here, now they're on a quest. And if I have any like secrets or big reveals for my character, I want my DM to know that as well. Because then, again, there's no point in having any part of my character made up that isn't for my DM to know about. Even small things like how I'm going to role play them. By telling my DM how I plan to role play the character, it gives the DM the opportunity to know what to set up in social situations or in combat situations to egg my character on, or to get on their nerves, or to make them happy. And I don't know about you, Monty. I hope this is the case because I sent you so much crap, but as a DM, I love getting that from my players, because every time that somebody sends me a bunch of this stuff, I look at it and think about my campaign, and I instantly start getting inspired for how to integrate this character into the world and the things I'm going to do to mess with that character.
I mean, it's great. Like there's things that you do and things that you don't. Like, for example, Jill made a list of all of her kids and who they are for Rudy Whittaker, right? All of her characters' kids. You made all Wilhelm's rules. I have not read all of Wilhelm's rules.
No, that's
I
fine.
probably won't read all. So that's an element of like, the Wilhelm's rules are a really important part of his character, but those are actually a thing that has come out through the way that you've role played them. So I'd say that things like personality traits that are going to define how you're going to role play your character and how your character might react to things, or quirks or things like that you've prepared. It's cool that, like, it's important that the DM knows that they exist, but like, I literally don't need to know every single one of Wilhelm's rules in advance. Like, it's up to you to decide how much you want that to be an impact on the campaign. And like, if I present you with a situation that tests one of your rules, awesome. But like, I don't feel the need necessarily yet to like go through your list of rules and be like, rule number, I'm going to make this come up. I mean, conceivably, I could
read the rules that I sent. No, I'm joking.
I'm sure I have, but like, I haven't done that step of I'm going to make sure that right. Cause like, it all is like, I don't want to like now take what you wrote and quiz you back on it. Right. I think I just need the gist of it. I think the biggest thing about this is like, it's going to vary from DM to DM as well. Like, some people are lucky and they get a DM who will just like lap all that up and loves it. Most DMs actually will. I think most DMs want more from their players, not less in general. The really big thing that like the thing that DMs don't want is the 97-page backstory that like is just a total Mary Sue fanfic for your character, right? Like the biggest things that your character needs to answer, and like the only things that the DM actually needs to know, is like, why is this person an adventurer? How could I possibly make them care about the plot hooks? And how are they going to interact with the other party members? And like, what are the cool powers that they have? Right? So like the biggest things to think about are like, what are like the things that you want to actually share with your DM are the things that are going to motivate your character, the things that are going to excite your character, the things that are going to engage them. And also, just as we said before, you should share your character with your DM, the fantasy of your character. Like, if you really imagine when you made this character that this character is one day going to ride a dragon, and that would be the character's like greatest dream, you should say that to the DM, because hopefully you get to do that, because that would probably be awesome and really satisfying and probably one of the most memorable D&D experiences. And you should kind of like underline that for the DM in case they haven't picked up the memo yet.
Awesome. Another question from Walt Flood here. There are so many backgrounds out there. Any suggestion on how to present these to new players? Or better, to build a backstory and then I suggest a similar background or two? I honestly, I know that there's a lot of backgrounds out there, and I find that a lot of them I don't ever even show a player unless they discover it on their own. If it was a new player, I have no problem ignoring, I'm going to say 50% of the backgrounds. I still would present them the ones in the player's handbook and say, do any of these sound right for your character? If no, let's talk. And the reason is that I think the backgrounds, at the very least, are inspiring. Sometimes I will look at a background and think about what the implications of that background are. Sometimes I use the bonds, flaws, and other elements, personality traits and whatnot to, I use them whole cloth to inspire my character, or I throw those completely out and present my own. And it depends on the level of your players. And I think a new group might very much vary in whether they are super creative or need a nudge to get the creative juices flowing. And so by presenting them all with the player's handbook backgrounds and saying, do any of these sound right for your character? And if they say, no, I was kind of picturing more this, or the other thing, maybe you know of one that you can suggest, or you could help them create their own, because creating a background isn't that hard, especially if your player comes to you and says, I already think I have, and they list like a personality trait, a bond, an ideal, and a flaw. Then they've done most of the work. Now you just pick a few tools and languages and stuff that is going to speak to the concept they made. But I think backgrounds are great for inspiration, but there's something that I have learned to only use like 25% of in my experience.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of DMs who do cool things like make PowerPoint presentations that break down the classes and stuff like that in short form, and sometimes even the backgrounds. But like, read the books too, right? And the background section in particular is a fun read. It's one to get ideas. It's one to kind of just enjoy. So like, no, I don't think players have to be like, I wouldn't be afraid of showing a new player that section and just saying, yeah, have a look over this, like read over it. It's fine. And like, or you either just have that conversation. Like, to me, it's either you as a DM are going to talk to your player about what they want for their character and curate some options for them and present that to them, or you're going to kind of just give them the book and say, make a character.
and here's the thing, there's a lot to go over, but when I'm designing a character, I skim through it quickly. If I'm reading Acolyte and I get the first sentence and I'm like, nope, not my character, I flip to the next one. Because I'm looking for the one that's going to speak to me. So, if I land on Folk Hero and I'm like, oh man, that sounds just like the way I pictured my character. Great, now I have all the inspiration in the world.
I think the key question to ask is, if your player has an idea for if they're a new player to D&D and they already have an idea for their character coming into the game, then just give them a couple suggestions. If they're a new player and they don't know what they want to play yet, and they haven't really thought about that, that's where you might want to just say to them, well, now take the book and actually go through it, right? It's really that question of like, because some new players come into Dungeons and Dragons and they don't know what they want yet. And some new players come into Dungeons and Dragons like, I just played Skyrim and I want to play a stealth archer. Right? So you gotta ask yourself, what do you have as a player in front of you? And how much handholding do you have to do? Andrew T wants to know, how do you think of unique and complex backstories, and what questions should I ask myself about my character when determining character traits? I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to pass it over to you, Kelly.
Cool.
Unique and complex is not always better, and is not always what you want for your character. Simple, straightforward, and kind of cliche is sometimes pretty powerful and sometimes okay. So, because you're the one playing it. And by that, even if you take something simple, it's going to become complex because you're playing it in a role-playing game. But Kelly, what are your thoughts?
So I really like this question of what question should I ask myself about my character when determining character traits? And I have a simple answer for that. You should ask why. Along every step of your character creation process, if you ask why, you're going to come out with a unique and complex backstory. So, for example, if Monty were to give me a race right now, I would say, okay, well, I'm creating a character who's, I don't know, a gnome. Why am I choosing a gnome? Well, what does that mean for my character? Why a gnome? It's a forest gnome, so he's lived in the forest his whole life, blah, blah, blah. I come up with why a gnome. Then it's a gnome druid. Why a gnome druid? What does the druid have to do with it? How are they a druid? Why did they become a druid? So now I need to come up with that part of my backstory. Then, the next thing, my background. Well, why this background? The spell selection. Why the spells? Why everything? And if you have an answer to why on every step of the way, what you end up with is a fully fleshed out backstory. Now you have a gnome who is a druid who chose the, lucky feat. And if you explain all three of those things in your backstory, then you have a fully fleshed out character. So the simple question of why, and it can be 2 sentences for each. And now you have a backstory to present to your DM.
Yeah, and the most important thing at the outset of character creation, why is your character on an adventure?
Yes.
Right? And that's why, like, for us, we almost always go back and don't let character creation happen in a vacuum, and make sure that the players connect their characters to each other and form those bonds and relationships. If you look at any piece of fiction, right? Just a great example. I'm a huge fan right now. I don't know if anyone else is. I don't normally watch a lot of anime, but I love Attack on Titan. I love Attack on Titan. And one of the really great lessons of Attack on Titan, despite that, is that, like, the characters' pasts are super relevant in the present. At one point in the 3rd season, a villain shows up who has a relationship to another one of the prominent player characters, one of the prominent main characters in the show, and we get to learn about that character, the main character, through the lens of encountering this villain who they have an existing relationship to each other, and we discover more about that. And so that's actually a really great example of how you can take a character who's like a very dark and brooding warrior and all of a sudden introduce a villainous character from their past and find out more about them in an interesting way. So as a DM, always be looking for opportunities to economize your NPCs and say, should this NPC be somehow related to one of my player characters? Which is also really good about encouraging your player characters to have friends and family. If you look at most fantasy fiction, and most really good fiction, there's family trees, webs of relationships and friendships, and people are related to each other in really important ways. It's not always a bunch of randos who didn't experience, like, you can make it about family, and it's really cool in that way.
And I actually think it's funny. A lot of people call out DRAKKENHEIM for having a very family-oriented theme with all 3 characters. But I think of some of my favorite shows right now. One that I am obsessed with is Dragon Prince, if there's any fans of Dragon Prince out there. But all the characters, good and evil, are all interconnected through webs of family, friendships, and relationships. And it makes every single character in that show super interesting. And I think that that's actually really important. Even the guy in the show who is clearly the villain, there are times in the show that I feel so bad for him because I was like, oh man, you were a good dude. Look at all this history. Look at all these relationships. You were a friend to some of my favorite characters, but you were just so misguided. And seeing that happen is great storytelling. And so by allowing that to flourish in the decisions made between characters and DMs, really creates a dynamic story, I think.
I mean, ultimately, like the some of the coolest things are those stories of like brother against brother or family turned against each other. I'm painting up. We're working on our Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer armies and stuff like that. And like the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the entire plot line is about this guy and his 20 kids. Like the whole story is about a bunch of brothers and really is driven by this family. And so family and those can be a cool driver. Don't make like, my only other tip for like this last question about like, what should I ask myself about my character is who is my character's family and how might they be interested? And honestly, as much as like, don't be afraid of it. Like, yes, the purpose of having a character that has family members is so those family members can be threatened. Like, that is the deal. That is the reason why your character has a family, is that it gives you something to care about. And it's going to be threatened. And as soon as you accept that, and allow that to be a thing that's going to happen in the campaign, then you can move on from that. And because look that's what happens in every fantasy story. Like that's just it. It's like people's families get threatened.
I mean, we haven't mentioned Star Wars, and Star Wars is literally about family. It's all about family. Yeah. That's all that it is. The whole thing is, I mean, it's about other stuff too, but let's be real, it's about family. And I mean,
even the example of Lord of the Rings, like Lord of the Rings has Bilbo and Frodo. Lord of the Rings has Boromir and Faramir and their family and their relationship and those lineages. Like family is, and the connection of the hobbits of growing up in the same place together. Like these connections all exist. Like even like, yes, the Fellowship of the Ring is a slight collection of randos, but there's still connections between all those characters and why they're there and what they're doing and what their purpose is in this whole thing. So even in your example of Lord of the Rings, like family matters.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
John asks, what are your thoughts on making paladins such that they can be the righteous warriors and fit in with a party of misfits? Any thoughts?
Talk to your group. You honestly, the way to make this work is to have a good group dynamic, right? Because again, what you generally want is the fantasy of, the stick in the mud paladin and the kind of the Joker rogue, right? That's a hilarious combo. And again, you see it so much in fiction, but like, if you want to be the straight-laced paladin in a party of misfits, then talk to the other players in the group and say, actually, I want to role play this dynamic. And like say that, I don't want to piss you guys off. I think that this would be a cool dynamic for us to role play around. And if everyone's on board for it, great. The issue here is that like sometimes people aren't on board for that. Sometimes people don't want to have inter-party conflict of any kind. That's you got to find out if your group is down for it.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about the role play, I think one thing to keep in mind is be lenient on the role play. If you look at any of those settings where you have the stern paladin and the goofy rogue who's a troublemaker, you can role play the paladin being like, I don't like what you're doing, but then they're going to keep doing it. And so you need to find a way to kind of be okay with that. And I often think that in most campaigns, one thing that is easy to latch onto is that whatever the situation is that you have to deal with, whatever the horrible situation is, it's more important than what the rogue is up to. So, oh, the rogue just stole money from that guy. Am I going to kill the rogue because he did that? No, I'm going to be like, did you just steal from that guy? And he's going to be like, sure did. And I'm going to be like, again? But meanwhile, we have a job to do, and you're my best ally in this job, and we need to save the world, and this group of people is the one assigned to do it. So here we are.
But it's also this idea of like the rogue and the paladin learn from each other, right? Like when you have those like that odd couple, like the two characters that like this person is really, really quirky and fun and random, and this person is really, really straight and serious and all down to the point. The idea of it is that the two characters develop by working together and seeing the benefits of the way each other think, right? And I think that so many D&D players are locked into the idea of their character, and so it's like, no, my character is this way, and your character is the one that has to change, and actually aren't willing to imagine maybe your character could be affected by this other person and change their point of view and develop as a character. It's actually a weird thing amongst the Dungeons & Dragons community that we love the idea of character development so much, but we are so resistant to actually embracing it in play.
Yeah. I mean, I even remember in the city campaign that we ran, this was a home campaign, when I first started my paladin, in the first episode, I think Joe was playing a rogue, maybe somebody was, and they stole money, and my paladin ran over and repaid the money. And that was the first episode. And by about halfway through, there was so much chaos going on. I remember the like slight nitpicky battles that we would get into, but eventually things became too escalated and important, and we started to get along and rely on each other, and we started to save each other's lives a lot more. And through that, the two characters became good friends. And I always remember that. And I mean, even DRAKKENHEIM has a bit of that with a bit of, at the beginning, they weren't getting along as well as they were towards the middle and end, and they learn from each other. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and as Samuel C. asks, like, what's our recommendation on playing a morally questionable character, like a tragic necromancer or a cryptic great old one warlock, while still maintaining party cohesion? And I think the whole idea, like, it just plays into the same thing as like the lone wolf. Is, do you imagine that person changing? Like, do you imagine your morally questionable character giving ground and becoming not morally questionable and learning about themselves and learning about the world? If the answer to that question is no, you don't want your character to change, well, then that's where that's why it's a problem, right? Like do you want to be an evil person as your character, and do you want to do that? Like, if you want to be an evil person and do evil things, I think that the entire group needs to be on board for that. But if you want to have a party cohesion thing, then I think that the counterbalance to that is have moments where your morally questionable character actually does the right thing. And actually is, they do the right thing when they got the chance to do the wrong thing. That's character development.
Yeah. That's character development, baby.
Yep.
That's going to be the saying of tonight's episode. That's character development. Yeah. So let's see. Tyler B asks, what do you feel is a good way to go about playing characters with significant secrets kept from the rest of the party, hidden identities, past mistakes or crimes, etc.?
Ooh, Kelly, you're the expert on this one.
Well,
have you ever made a character that doesn't have a terrible secret?
No. What's the point? I want my terrible secret. So here's the thing. If you are making a character with a terrible secret, you want it to be revealed. Do not make a terrible secret that you don't want to be revealed, because then you're making pointless nothing. And if you are making a terrible secret, tell your dungeon master what the terrible secret is. If you don't, and this has happened to me, like I've had a player who was like, my character has a dark secret and I'll reveal it to you at a time that is most convenient for me. But at the end of the day, I didn't know what the terrible secret was, so I couldn't put it into the story. And I had to really convince that player to tell me. But if you just tell your DM, you don't have to tell the other players because that's fun. But also don't let your terrible story put you in a situation, and hopefully you can work with your DM on this, where it ends up antagonizing the other players. Like, you don't want to be like, my terrible secret is that I plan to murder the rest of the party. That's not a good terrible secret. But if your terrible secret is like, a long time ago, I accidentally murdered the son of the villain of this campaign, sending them on a spiral to create the villain that they are now, and oops, that was my doing. When that comes out at the table, it's going to be like, whoa, that's crazy. And you want that. You want those moments where the party doesn't know, but your DM has to.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, and like good terrible secrets are usually the classic terrible secret is my character is related in a familial way to a person who did something awful, right? So like my parent is the villain of the story. But sometimes it can be, oh, I actually am the villain, or I was the villain in some way. And so like I think it's important that the secret is a living secret. And when you're, from the dungeon master's perspective, when your player comes to you with a secret, you just were given a gift. Like, you have to look at it as a gift. And you also have, like, I feel that when a player comes to me with a deep, dark secret for their character, I now have a responsibility to make sure that, like, that secret gets revealed in the most dramatically awesome way it possibly can. Right? So that's a matter of trust. Like, that is the trust of having a secret, is like the player's going to be like, I'm going to make this because I want to have the secret get revealed in a cool way that has an impact. And that's the promise that you make to, as a dungeon master, to a player that does this. A player that doesn't tell you their secret doesn't trust you to reveal it in a cool way. And unfortunately, because of that, it's never going to get revealed in a cool way. Right?
Yeah. So tell your DMs about your dark secrets and make them non-confrontational with the rest of the party, but make them interesting with the plot. And that's going to be good. Gregory L. asks, in your experience, are there any background or character choices that indicate that someone will be a problem player? And if so, what are they? I want to say personally, no, because I think that by labeling choices in the game as more accustomed to problem players, it paints those choices in a bad picture. And I also, I know that Monty and I have talked about how there's some cliches that are more in tune with problematic play styles, but I also want to pinpoint that there are people who can pull off those types of characters in a non-confrontational way. So for example, we talk about the lone wolf rogue being a possible problematic character, and some people who dive into that and are like, I'm going to backstab the party, I'm going to steal from the party and be a general jerk because I'm a backstabbing rogue. But at the same time, I would not say that if your characters decide to play a lone wolf rogue, they're going to be a problem, because that is false. There are a lot of people who can play a lone wolf rogue and be just as amazing as everybody else and just to contribute in just as meaningful a way. So I don't want to paint anything in a bad light here, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's so strange because, like, I DM'd a lot of Adventurers League back in the day. And somehow by the end of it, I could tell within 5 minutes of sitting down with a person if they were a problem player or not. I don't know how I do that, but I can usually tell pretty quickly if someone's going to be, like, if we're not going to jive well with each other. And sometimes it is a mismatch or not. And I don't, it's really hard to describe it. But it's never connected to their choices as a character, right? Yeah. It's almost always connected to the commonality between most problem players that I find is a desire to is usually selfishness. And I don't know what it is, but like, I feel like I can tell when people like, there's just certain things about like selfishness that belie it. I don't know if you know that when you read people, but like, do you ever like sit down with someone for a little while and you're like, you're a selfish person. Like, I don't know what it is, but like, you are a selfish person. And that is the quality of like, unequivocally, most of the problem players that I've ever experienced in my life have been selfish people. That's usually been it. So that's the indicator, and that's not a care. So maybe the indicator then is like, are there certain backgrounds or character traits that are often associated with selfishness? Like, often the rogue, right, is often associated with selfishness. And do selfish people gravitate towards selfish character archetypes? Maybe, but not always. Yeah. So
I'd say there's no reason to paint anything in a bad light, because everybody has amazing ways to play this game. And problem players are going to sprout up no matter what you do in all locations. So Troy M asks, considering starting a new campaign where we essentially play as ourselves in a fantasy world, have you worked with an idea like this before? And what do you think would be a cool way of still building out interesting backstories? I've heard a lot of people have this idea of like, design yourself in Dungeons and Dragons. What I think is more interesting is if you are creating a game where everybody's playing themselves, they have somehow transformed into the fantasy version of themselves. Because let's be honest, if I was creating Kelly as a D&D character, I would have no higher than an 11 probably in any ability, maybe a 12, and probably a handful of like 8s and 7s. Regular humans do not excel in the way that action heroes in D&D do. I mean, like, I would like to say that if you handed me a sword and shield and told me to fight a dragon, I would be brave enough to do it, but I would probably just pee in my pants, drop the sword and shield, and run away crying. And I mean, that does not make a good fantasy character. So what you have to do is, if you are going to do that, imagine a story where, like, I guess you as a D&D character have somehow ended up in a fantasy world where you are imbued with powers beyond your normal might. And like, you know, the smart one in your group has become a wizard. The strong one in your group has become a fighter. And that might be the best way to approach this, because otherwise you're going to end up with a bunch of average Joes running around trying to do the best they can. But then you get to kind of embrace this fun, what are you in a fantasy setting, which I think is a better question.
I have to admit, I am not a fan of this concept. And I would probably excuse myself from a campaign that was the premise.
I know, but that's not the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to make a character. I like making characters, and this is one of those things where I don't like it because I feel like I don't get to make a character. I don't get to like, I get to imagine myself as somebody else, but you already kind of get to do that when you make a character. Like, then it's my choice. Like every D&D character in many ways is already like a fragment of the player's personality in some way. In like, it can be a funhouse mirror version of themselves, but it almost always is anyways. So there's already a little bit of like self-insertion inherent to D&D. I just find that so like, for me personally, when I hear that concept, I'm just like, just absolutely make sure that everyone's on board with that idea, because me personally, I would like, if Kelly, if you came to me and said, this is my next campaign, I'm going to run this game for you, I'd be like, really? Can we not? But that would be, yeah, that would be me. I don't know. There's just something about it that I can't 100% place it. I know there's people that totally love it, and for the right group, it's the right idea. But I'm just going to acknowledge my bias there and say, like, for me, it's kind of,
Oh, okay, well, how about this? Another direction you could go with this is if we look at our good friend Brennan Lee Mulligan's Sleeping City. If you're doing a modern setting in D&D, which he does flawlessly, then yeah, you know what? I think it would be hilarious. Again, don't remove the fantasy elements from what you're doing. Do not remove the D&D isms. So like if I was doing that and you were like, Kelly, you're going to play a retail store employee, but you're also now a ranger because stuff's going wrong and you find out that you have these awesome powers. And suddenly I'm a retail store employee turned ranger. That might be a funny idea. So like you could do like a modern setting, but you still play into the fantasy of D&D. And that's the one thing that I would say is don't limit what D&D offers as a fantasy escapism reality for us to dive into. So we've come to the end of that section. Any good questions from the chat?
Oh, we got a lot from chat, actually.
Yeah, we won't be able to get to everybody today. We're probably going to answer like 3 now and then 3 after the next section and keep going from there.
One question we had: have we had the chance to try out some of the new feats in action as well? Do we have any favorites? My Clockwork Soul is taking Metamagic, Addict, and Telekinetic.
Of course you are. What did Osiris take? I don't know if Osiris actually took any of the feats. I've designed some characters.
I should also say, I'm also taking the Graviturgy spells from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount.
Oh, right. Yes, Monty asked me about that, and I said, go for it. Why not? Probably because he's building something that's going to mess with me horribly, but I'm excited. I'm just excited to get messed up by a Clockwork Soul or a Clockwork Soul sorcerer. Clockwork Orange, what? But in terms of the feats, I can tell you something that has happened for me. I've in the time that we've been in lockdown and I've been kind of bored at home, I'm doing this thing where because I'm working on the DRAKKENHEIM book, I'm designing the section on classes right now. So what's happening is as I'm brainstorming how classes fit into DRAKKENHEIM, I keep getting great ideas for characters and going and designing them. And I keep landing on the Fey Touched feat, the feat for Fey Touched. I think it's got to be my favorite new one because I keep going to it and wanting to use it. I love it. And also the Piercer, Slasher, and Bludgeoning one, I think are great. So those feats continually stand out to me every time I'm creating a character.
Rule 303 wants to know, do the new customization options for customizing your lineage and the custom lineage and tashes make the variant human obsolete? Do you think Wizards is trying to push feats as the expected start for a campaign? For me, no, I don't. I think the variant human is really good still, but it's hard. The variant human is a hard sell when the difference between the variant human and the custom lineage is, do you want an extra skill or do you want dark vision? Because a lot of the time dark vision wins.
Yeah. What I will say is I still found myself using variant human. Do I think it's obsolete? No. Do I think it's been knocked down a peg? Yes, but that's okay. I don't know about everybody else, but I actually oddly like playing humans in Dungeons and Dragons. For me, the fantasy of Dungeons and Dragons is about exploring a fantasy world. And I think that a lot of the fantasy worlds that we see are told through the lens of humanity. Mm-hmm. And humanity to me is a very interesting lens to look at the rest of the world because we can all relate to it. Do I play other races? Yes, all the time. But the one I've played the most is the human. And not because it's the best. I actually have, like I said, I created 20 characters. I think 4 or 5 of them are variant humans because I still find that interesting. And I don't think they got bad because of Tasha's. I think that they're just, do you want a feat and to be a human? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I have to say that, like, for me, I've almost always played human characters. Like, generally, I gravitate towards just playing humans because it establishes a nice baseline of what the characters are in relation to the fantasy world. And I definitely like to encourage people to play humans. And I think, to talk about the Drakkenheim thing, I think that's another thing that like there's like this. I had this section of like optional advice for dungeon masters for a Drakkenheim campaign, and one of them actually is like consider asking your players to be humans, because it actually makes I think Drakkenheim is actually a setting that is more interesting when the player characters are almost all humans. But that's just me. Like if I was writing Drakkenheim, I think I've said this before, that I don't really feel the need to include the kitchen sink of all the fantasy creatures in the world of Drakkenheim, because D&D encourages us to do that, but I don't really feel the need to do that myself.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Drakkenheim setting, like most of the characters that show up are human, and the only other thing that I know we've talked about is a lot of the half races are quite common, like half elves, we haven't seen a lot of half orcs, but a lot of the half races are very common, and so you'll find that a lot in our settings, and that's just the way that like Monty and I kind of like to go. And I think, I think to finish that, at the same time, Monty's never said no to one of our character ideas. It's just, you'll also notice in both campaigns, there's been a human. And that is usually to keep it grounded in the humanisms of the world.
Yep.
One more from chat?
Yeah. So we got Dragon Pauls asked, how would you handle romance between two-player characters? I have a situation where there's the budding seeds of a possible romance, but I haven't brought up the possibility to the table, and I'm looking for advice.
Okay, this one's actually tricky because a lot of this depends on your party dynamic and what everybody is comfortable with at the table. I would say that in a romance between characters, there's no reason to go into great details. You can have romantic options. And actually, in my campaign that I ran Tyranny of Dragons, there were 3 romantic plot lines that took place, all between player characters and NPCs. But all of those were played very it was very light and fun at the table, and actually turned into really dramatic moments at the table because these characters really started to like NPCs. We role played them like hanging out together during downtime. And then later in the campaign, trouble came and there were problems for many of those NPCs that the players now needed to get them out of, because the villain learned about these relationships and use that against the players. So I think that budding romances at the table can actually lead to some really interesting roleplay opportunities, but there's no reason to do anything weird with it. And I think we all know what I mean when I say do anything weird with it. Just let it be like a nice little part of the plot of your campaign without making it a centerpiece or something that turns into or divulges into anything distracting or upsetting at the table.
I think also that's where you just kind of have to have a conversation with the players in question and the dungeon master and be like, okay, so where are we actually going with this? Like, is this actually because like if you had a small group and that was a thing like the players were on board with and were interested in, that could be a really important and cool story of the campaign, right? As long as the players are not making a joke out of it, but are actually taking it seriously and are trying to like create an interesting role-playing tension. Because like having your character bond be another player character creates tension and creates interesting dramatic stakes. And again, that's the purpose to do it, right? Like again, budding romance in a classic fantasy story, Han and Leia in Star Wars. Actually rather creepy. Rewatched it the other day and was kind of like, kind of coming on a little bit strong there, Harrison Ford. But in any sense of like of doing that sort of thing, like it informs the characters' decisions and informs their actions of why they do the things they do, and so the romance itself now actually reacts as a character motivator and a plot motivator, and now the characters are tied to each other, right? Perfect. Another amazing thing that you could do with a character romance story: Bonnie and Clyde. You could imagine doing a 2-player campaign where the player characters were inspired by Bonnie and Clyde and were this kind of like trailblazing couple going across the world, robbing banks and causing heists, or some sort of like really cool, really intimate character dynamic, right?
Like if you have like a husband and wife who adventure together, then I actually think that creates a really interesting dynamic, because now they're going to always be trying to protect each other. They're kind of a package deal. And like my partner and I have actually talked about, if we ever play together, how fun it would be to have these two characters who have this sort of like adventuring duo relationship. And I think that's a really great way to go, that actually would inspire a lot of creative and great role play at the table.
Yeah. Right. And or you could take it in a different direction and do like a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, where it's like two characters who are on the run from their families who don't want them to like there's so many cool ways that you can actually do it. So it really is the question of like, is it just a side thing, or is it like a cool part of the story? Like, how does it engage? And that's where, again, you take it out, you step out, you sit down with the players and say, okay, so what do you actually want to do with this? Right. And like, you don't be afraid of doing that as a dungeon master with anything that your characters are doing. You don't have to play your hand. As a dungeon master, the strategy to have these conversations with your player characters is if you see your player characters are building towards something, either a relationship of any kind, and it doesn't need to be a romantic relationship between two characters. It could be a friendship. It could be two characters decide that they want to make a portal to hell. You just need to take a moment and ask them questions about what they want to do, where they see it going, and you listen. Like, you just go like, so you want to make a portal to hell? So what do you imagine that being like? Oh yeah. So you're going to culminate the ceremony of your making your portal to hell with getting married to each other. Interesting. Wasn't expecting that. Tell me more. And then now your players are writing the campaign for you. So great.
Let's jump back into our patron questions. This is a section on character build options. And we're going to start with Joey Johnson, who asks, do you use the standard AL character sheet, or is there another sheet you find you prefer? Any tools, web tools that help streamline the building process? We have a very big answer for this. Monty, what do we use?
We use D&D Beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Monty and I do like, okay, there's a lot that I understand about D&D Beyond. With like, at first I was like, oh man, you have to buy all the books again. But then when I started using D&D Beyond, I couldn't help but buy all the books again, because D&D Beyond I had to pay for the full thing, because I have about 100 characters designed in there. I use it all the time, and it's so streamlined. And the fact that like back in the day, I had my character sheet, I had the spell cards, magic item cards, I had rule books open in front of me. It was kind of a mess, whether I was a player or a DM. I had a slew of things in front of me to remember everything. But now with D&D Beyond, I can like hover over the spell and there's the rules. I can hover over the item, there's the rules. I can look up any magic item in the game if Monty says I get it, and there's the rules. It's so convenient that I just I can't recommend it enough. If you can get into it, it's worth it. It's worth it all.
And I would say the standard, I don't actually, the AL Adventurers League doesn't set the standard that every table has to use. Adventurers League just uses a slightly modified graphically version of the basic character sheet that's in the back of the book anyways. So and like there are a lot of other cool character builder apps and like Excel sheets and stuff like that, but we use D&D Beyond.
Yeah. Michael R asks, How can you best balance avoiding cliches while still trying to make an optimal character build? Why are we avoiding cliches?
I mean, it's it's only a cliche if your table has already seen 6 people playing Polearm Masters, right? Don't worry about what the internet meta is. Don't worry about what the internet says are cliches. Your table is its own meta. Your table is its own environment. Your table is the only place that matters. So yes, maybe you want to play an optimal character build. You want to play a divination wizard with the lucky feet, or a crossbow expert gloomstalker. If no one at your table has ever played that before, it's not a cliche.
I also think, like, if we go back to the backstories and like looking at backgrounds and things like that, with the whole question of asking yourself why, if you come up with completely different whys on a character that's been done before, I'm going to give you an example. I one time played, I think I played a barbarian polearm master named Max Powers or Max Damage in a one shot at your table. And I also played a barbarian polearm master with a glaive in Untold Tales as Mara. Those two characters were essentially similar optimized builds, but they were completely different from each other, and neither of them could even be remotely compared to one another. Because one was a big meathead walking cliche. He was meant to be. His name was Max Damage. I mean, how could he not be? The other one was a distinct, well thought out character that had its own backstory. And so if you're looking at optimized, if you just put a little bit more thought into making the way you're going to portray the character a little different, cliches exist in my mind in D&D. Playing into a cliche, you get to answer the question, what would I do with that cliche? Because it's going to be different than what every other person has done with that cliche, which makes it unique.
Totally. And I would just say that your character's build is only a fraction of who your character is. Right? There's more to your character than what's on your character sheet, like in the stats of your character. Remember that. Like, your character is a person too, and they can be a vibrant thing. Letired asks, if you're starting from level 1, how do you make the transition from players not having a subclass to now having a subclass while still making sense and not seeming clunky?
Interesting question, because
I got 2 thoughts.
Okay,
I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Go for it.
Number 1, just accept it. It's clunky. I do think it's a design flaw with 5e. I do. It's weird. My suggestion is take some downtime between level 2 and level 3.
Yeah, I think something that I have done recently, before I knew how long we were going to be in quarantine for, I was prepping a new home game, which seems to have been put on hold for the time being. But part of that prep was everybody designed a level 1 character. And I asked everybody if they had an idea what subclass they were leaning towards. And everybody did. And so what that means is I get to spend the first few levels of the game building their plotline up to their choice in subclass. But if they don't know, there's not really a good way to integrate it other than what you said, using downtime to be like, oh, you've discovered such and such. But that is actually the reason why I say it's an interesting question is it's actually hard to fit into the game role-playing wise without taking a weird 3-session break where you go on personal adventures where they discover their subclasses, which could be cool, but also that's a lot of extra work.
Yeah, it's a weird artifact in D&D 5. It's actually a weird design flaw because there's a rationale behind it so that you ease players into the game before they make a big character defining choice. But narratively, it is one of those things that is weird. And it came from starting player characters at level 2 or level 3 has been a thing for a really long time, right? So it's tricky.
Yeah, that's kind of a half answer, but that's kind of the best I got, is that there isn't really a solid answer to that, because It's just kind of a tough design thing that we got to figure out, and every DM needs to navigate. Michael Epp asks, in your experience, is it more fun to max out a character's abilities or to build a character with some flaws, to miss out on some opportunities for power? I have run into this issue when choosing between a variant human and just plain old human character, for instance. I just built a Gloomstalker Ranger who would have been more powerful as a variant, but I didn't go that way because I would have been picking variants just to have more powerful roles, not to be more interesting. Thanks as always for the good work, Dungeon Dudes. Well, thank you for the question.
Play a variant human. The stock human sucks. Just don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
Don't feel guilty about that. Play the variant human, take the feat.
I think with the choice specifically shown here between human and variant human, I actually would go with the more powerful option, because the choice actually has nothing to do with your character build or role play, because either way you're human. If your choice is between human or halfling, and variant human would be the more optimal choice, but the story you want to tell is about a halfling, then pick the halfling.
Yeah.
But if your choice, and like same thing goes, I don't know if there's another question in here about this, but same thing goes for me with, like, I think there was a question about spells. Do you pick spells that are thematic for your character, or do you pick spells that are going to be more powerful? And I think the answer is that sometimes there's a spell I just really, really want, and I will find a roleplay reason to justify it, but I do a little bit of both. I will also take spells that feel thematic to my character, but if I know what spells I hate, I just won't take them. Even if it's the most thematic spell, I fall somewhere in the middle. Are there options I can find that are both thematic and that I'm going to enjoy trying out at the table? If I build a character, I could see myself building a character who takes Witchbolt. We all know my opinion on Witchbolt, but I think that there are character builds that I would actually love to put Witchbolt on because it would be really thematic and I would use it and I would like it. But yeah, that's just kind of my opinion.
Yeah.
Is I pick what is thematic, but I don't shy away if an optimal build presents itself to my theme.
Here's the thing, right? Is sometimes you just got to make that choice. Like, imagine being invited to 2 parties on New Year's Eve. One party is your work party. Another party is this absolute banger of like a house party, right? The house party is going to have a bunch of cool people there who are fun to hang around with. But the work party, if you go, you got the opportunity to impress your boss and get a big raise. I can't tell you which one of those 2 things you should do. I know what I would do, but you have to make that life choice, right? Like it's a life choice. I would go kiss my boss's ass probably because I love money. But also, like, to me, the banger of the house party actually sounds awful. Because
I would go to the house party.
but like it really is like if you are in the choice of like, am I going to play the halfling because role playing, or am I going to play the variant human because sharpshooter? You have to decide, are you going to have more fun playing the halfling, or are you going to have more fun kicking ass with sharpshooter? And only you can make that choice, right? The agonizing part of it is FOMO. Like if you are someone that gets fear of missing out, I don't know how to help you with your FOMO. Like, I don't know how to help myself with my FOMO. So, and I think that's the biggest thing of like this like story or power thing is like, it's like the grass is always greener on the other side. It's like, yeah, are you going to play the halfling and always wish, well, I could have won that fight because I could have had sharpshooter. Well, that's the choice you made. Don't let FOMO and don't let the power FOMO thing or the story FOMO thing consume you in your character choices. Play the character you want to play. But like, that's the hardest thing. It's like, sometimes you genuinely don't know what character you want to play. Like, do you want, like, and only you can decide.
Yeah. And I think for DMs out there, be open in early game to let your character make adjustments, or your players make adjustments. If I build a character because I'm really into the role play, but I find that I'm just not having fun because of the mechanics, as a DM, if I was the DM for that player, I would be like, okay, well, what's going to be more fun for you? Do you want to switch subclasses? Do you want to change some things up? And in the first few levels, I'm very okay with that because I would rather my players have a character that they are endlessly having fun with than being stuck in like a year of playing D&D with me with a character they don't like. So never punish your characters or your players for discovering that they're not having fun the way they wanted to at the table. I think that sucks. And I think that we should encourage creating fun for everybody at the table.
Yeah. And yeah, if you're not having fun with your character because of a choice that you made, tell your DM and fix it.
Yeah. Adam Wise asks, hiya. My question is, when you hit the levels for ability score increases or selecting new feats, which do you tend to pick for your characters, and what's your thought process behind it, at least up to level 8 or so? Monty and I both have some opinions about this whole thing.
Sharpshooter, crossbow expert, polearm master, great weapon master, and lucky are all more powerful than an ability score increase. Take those first if you want to take those. Otherwise,
I think something that you'll hear Monty and I say once in a while is we actually hate that you have to choose. I wish we love feats. And actually, if you've ever heard in our episodes or in DRAKKENHEIM about our standard array that we use, which is a slightly more powerful standard array, the idea there is we've done that so that there's less of a frustration of choice and more of an option for feats. Because in my experience, and yes, I agree, Monty, those are some of the most powerful feats, but I actually wish I never had to take an ASI over a feat. I wish I could just pick feats. Like, there would not be a bad feat if I just got both. If you let me take an ASI and I get to pick up the chef feat, I'm going to pick up the chef feat because why not? I want to cook and bake cookies for my friends and all that. Like, I really wish that we could take feats more. But unfortunately, I care too much about my character also being potent at the game table that if I feel like they need the boost, I will give them the boost. But I would opt for feats.
I wonder if you could do a mod of D&D 5e where you got to take a feat once every 5 levels.
And maintain the ASIs.
Yeah. The ASI progression is there. But just at level 1, 5, 10, 15, and 20, you can take a feat. I wonder if that would work.
My biggest draw to playing a fighter is that I get to just build them on feats.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite thing about them. I wish feats were more accessible.
Like, yeah, like maybe those feel like awkward level. Like, actually, you could do it at 1, 5, 11, and 17. And because 5, 11, and 17 are already the tier breaks. Yeah. So at the start of each tier, you get to take a feat.
I also, like, if you really want to explore feats in your game, I would literally pepper in feats as optional things that players can get gifted or train in. Mm-hmm. We did this in our running downtime video recently. But if you really want to explore the world of feats, have a cook in the nearby town who can train a player in the chef feat. Have a retired assassin who's willing to spend some time teaching them how to gain the poisoner feat. Invent ways that feats work outside of having to choose them. And that way you reduce the sad frustration of having to choose, because I actually hate having to choose. I despise it. So that's my opinion.
Kristen K asks, I'm running a Hunter Ranger, started before your great video in Tasha's, and I want a multi-class. What is the best level to make the switch, and what are your favorite secondary classes? Party is composed of a Hexblade Warlock and a Barbarian who grows a tail, so beast path of some kind, I think. Thank you. Level 5.
Level 5.
Yeah. That's when you get out of the Ranger. Yeah.
You take the Ranger up to level 5. That assures you get most of the key abilities, and you get your ASI or feat, and you get the extra attack. The easy answer, if you're looking for a multi-class option, is Rangers pair very nicely with a fighter multi-class. That's an obvious one. I mean, most things pair really nicely with a fighter multi-class. But that way you get to pile on, action search.
Yep, it's great.
It's
it also pairs really, really well with Rogue.
Yeah.
And you can basically dip out of Ranger, like stop taking Ranger levels after level 5 and go fighter or Ranger fighter or Rogue the rest of the way, and you'll love your character.
Yeah. Both of those complement. It depends if you want to be more obviously if you go multi-class fighter, you're going more for a hunter who's like on the front lines hunting, or if you go rogue, you're going more for the sneaky hunter. But that sort of combination, there's two routes to go there, and both are excellent. I don't really know if there's what else would you pair with the Ranger? Anything else? Maybe I could see a Ranger Druid. But that's
I probably wouldn't do
that's for thematic purposes. It's not an optimal build at all. But if you wanted to really dive into the nature aspect of the Ranger, you could do that. But again, it's a suboptimal build, but it's very thematic. But that's the only really other thing I can think of.
Goblin, great name, asks, when choosing spells, is it better in your opinion to choose spells your character would learn or prep, or spells that would benefit the party? Again, why are those things, like, you get to decide what makes sense for your character. So you can reverse rationalize that it makes sense for your characters to prepare spells that would benefit the party. You get to decide what makes sense, and you get to decide based on what it makes sense for. Is it an asshole move, for instance, not to learn attack spells? I intend for my bard to be a support character range fighter. Or as a cleric, not to prep Revivify because your character's knowledge, you will have no need to bring back the fallen today. Revivify is the spell that you never, like, the one time that you don't prepare Revivify is the time that you need to use it. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
What do you think, Kelly?
Well, I think to go back to what you said, the answer lies in your character creation and your concept. I think that it is more important to go into your concept. There's no rule, and there shouldn't be a rule, and nobody should ever tell you that because you're playing a cleric, you need to take Revivify. I had a cleric at my table. They were a Tempest cleric, and they took all damagey, tempesty spells and spells that revolved around that. They weren't a healer. And they said going into the game, I'm playing a Tempest cleric, but I'm going to be the God of Thunder. That is my whole thing. And I'm not mad at that. I mean, we play all the time without a healer.
We do, but if I would, it's like tempting fate, man. Like, what about the one time that you really needed it?
Well, you know what? I've survived several campaigns without Revivify already.
That's true.
And I mean, the same thing with, what was the other option? Not taking attack spells. Support characters are extremely valuable to the party. We had a bard at our table who mostly cast haste, hypnotic pattern, and I think it was fairy fire were like other go-tos. None of these are attacky spells, but man, do they change the game. Haste, especially if you're casting haste on a character and, like, I don't know, just bolstering the party or like anything like that, you are going to be contributing to the play. I think what's important is to broadcast what your goal is with your character to everybody so that nobody's disappointed that you didn't pack Revivify.
Yeah, and you want, I mean, when you're choosing spells for your character, you're really thinking about like, when I rank a spell, my metric is, does this spell give you more opportunities to do cool, impactful, and meaningful things? That is what makes a spell powerful. And so that's why Animate Objects is a very powerful spell, because there's a lot of situations where you could use that spell in a creative way that have a huge impact on the game. But if you bring Cone of Cold, the only thing you can do with Cone of Cold is freeze stuff and damage people. So that and so what you have to think about is maybe you have a lot of fun freezing stuff and damaging people. And the idea of a toolbox spell like Animate Objects doesn't really appeal to you because toolbox spells aren't fun for you. Toolbox spells are a lot of fun for me. So that is where you have to decide. Just with every spell, the key question to ask yourself is this going to create a fun situation or more than fun? The better word to use is not fun, but rewarding. Is this spell going to create a rewarding gameplay experience for you by taking it? Then take it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of spells out there, even the example you just gave, I think Animate Objects is a better spell than Cone of Cold. But if I'm making a wizard who my theme is cold, I'm not upset about taking Cone of Cold. It's a great spell. And so if you have a theme for your character and you're going to play a support character, or you're going to play a character who focuses on cold spells, or heck, if you're designing a character around the idea of poison and disease and you take all the spells that have to do with that, it's not going to be optimal. But if that's your idea and it's going to be rewarding for you at the table, then do it. And again, this all goes back, a lot of this chat tonight has been about, I keep going back to this whole thing about broadcasting your character to the rest of the players and to the DM so that everybody's on board with your idea. That way, nobody, again, is going to be like, why did you pick these subpar spells? They're going to be like, oh, you're designing a character who your goal is to be this. So these spells make sense. In the recent Untold Tales, I played a scribe wizard. I took spells that I almost knew wouldn't come up, but I just felt like I had to take them. I took Skywrite, I took Identify, I took the linguistic feat. And
see, this is the thing that breaks my heart, though. None of that came up.
I know, but if we were playing in a full campaign, it would have. I guarantee it would have.
And that's where, and I think that's the hardest thing about looking at these characters is if you take a thematic choice for your character and then that thematic choice either falls flat or doesn't have an opportunity to do something cool, it's kind of heartbreaking.
It is.
Right? And so that's why when I think of what I want for my characters, I do think about what is actually going to come up in the game because I want my choices to matter. And I can look at certain spells and go, I can take this spell, but there's no way this spell is going to matter. Except for the one time that it does. And maybe that one time, and sometimes that one time is worth it, right? Yeah. But it is a thing to always think about. So I think it is a balance because obviously, in a lot of cases you get to pick more than one spell. So make sure that you pick a mix, right? Choose a couple spells that have a good, broad, general application. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to pack at least one damage dealing spell. Just one. And then take all the other things. And that way, at least you can play that game when the opportunity comes up. And it might be a cool moment in the campaign. Maybe it is a cool moment in the game when your bard does bust out dissonant whispers and explode someone's brain or synaptic static. So you don't always have to, and maybe it is a cool moment when your Tempest Cleric is like, no, I can heal them. And your Tempest Cleric is like, your Tempest Cleric cast Revivify by channeling lightning into their hand and defibrillating someone. And that's and now your character just got that cool moment.
Yeah,
right?
I think actually you just touched on something that we love. And the thing is that a lot of spells don't necessarily include flavor text for what it looks like to cast that spell. So if you're trying to figure out, oh, I want to pick these really cool spells, but they don't feel thematic. I started to do this with Sebastian Crow. You might notice at the beginning I didn't do it, but towards the middle and end, what I started to do is I turned every spell into a shadow sorcerer type spell. Polymorph was no longer, I changed them into a T-Rex. It's shadows engulf the character and it turns into a shadowy T-Rex. Or my hypnotic pattern was writhing shadowy snakes that hypnotize people. I started to think, what does it look like when my character casts the spell? That way it's less about the spells you pick and more about what it looks like when your type of character casts them.
And that makes it awesome for your character to cast that. Like, now I'm really into this idea of like a Tempest Cleric being like, I hold the spark of life itself in my hands. Live, damn you! Zap! Yeah. And that's how you cast Reveal. That's a cool moment. And I guarantee you, if you roleplay a Tempest Cleric doing that, that moment in the campaign is going to be a memorable moment in your game. And that's what we're all here for, right? We're here for the memorable moments. So, you know, that's what you got to imagine. Reagan C asks, with the new floating ASIs for character creation, that's the new Tasha's Lineage rules, what would you play as a wizard or sorcerer? Would you play a turtle to get a tank mage with shield? What would you play that? Someone brought up a blade singer turtle before.
I actually I love the turtle spellcaster option now because it gives you a good AC. Also, I just feel like an old tortoise makes a really charming wizard. A little tortoise with a wizard cap, it's great. I love the aesthetic. I want to see more outside of the box wizards. I actually want to see some mountain dwarf wizards. I don't know. We don't see enough dwarf wizards.
I mean, the human and the custom lineage, wizards and sorcerers are still really hungry for feats.
Yeah,
they still really love them. So I and honestly, I think high AC is kind of overrated. I think people kind of lose their mind over an AC because everyone thinks that every attack that you're going to suffer and all the worst, there's more than one way to skin a turtle, and your high AC is lovely, but enjoy getting hit by a fireball.
Do we want to? We have a few minutes left. So do you want to do some fan questions?
Yeah, I think we actually got through most of our Patreon questions. There were a few that we had to curate, but I think we got through most of them. I think that okay. Here's a question that is more Drakkenheim related. How do you design NPC stat blocks such as Jupiter Jones or Rivers from Drakkenheim? How do you scale them as the players level up? Since I remember NPCs leveling up. I just lit my NPC stat blocks out of the back of the monster manual and Volo's Guide to Monsters, and when it's relevant for them to level up, I just do it. Spending a lot of time on NPC stat blocks, especially NPCs like River and Jupiter Jones. Like Jupiter Jones, it mattered more because we actually had combat encounters with Jupiter Jones, but River really, her stats never have really mattered much.
Yeah. I think, again, we talk about, this is another theme of Dungeon Dudes that everybody should take in is the idea of reflavoring. And really, for both you and I, it's the characters come to life through the role play and the design of the character. But when it comes to them in combat, a lot of them are just like the gladiator stat block from the back of the book or the warlock stat block from the back of the book. There's great NPC stat blocks. And if you want, you can switch up the weapons they have. You can switch up the spells they have. You can give them maybe an ability from another stat block or legendary actions from another stat block if you want to really beef them up. But rather than designing anything whole cloth, it's usually I take a stat block and I might add 2 to 3 things to make it unique. But mostly that is just grabbing something from another thing rather than inventing something. Like If I have a bunch of minions and I want to make them more interesting, giving them pack tactics, cool, that's something more interesting. And there's so many different ways to go with this. So it's really more like reflavoring. Don't worry about the fact that the gladiator says it's a certain thing. Describe any character you want who is a big, bold fighter and give them the gladiator stat block. And if the players level up high enough, switch them to the champion. I think there's a stat block for that. Yeah, so you upgrade the stat block if the players.
Yeah, there's actually a cool. You can do the veteran, which is challenge rating 3, the gladiator, which is challenge rating 5, and the champion, which is in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which is challenge rating 9. So you actually have a really, or you can also start with the knight. So you actually have a really nice progression, and you can just like swap out the abilities as you need to between those. And actually you can go one further because there's a legendary monster called the Warlord, which is CR 12. So you can actually level you can level an NPC up. One of the things about NPCs and levels is NPCs, the only people in the world that gain experience points are the player characters, right? Like your NPCs can level up, like you don't have to worry about them gaining experience points. You can do whatever you want with that. And like, I don't necessarily assume that like this character might be a level 10 wizard, but they're a level 10 wizard because they read books for 20 years, not because they went out and fought dragons. And that's a different person than the wizard that went out and fought dragons for 10 years and got to level 10. So when you're conceptualizing your NPCs, you don't have to think that your NPCs work like player characters, because they don't.
Yeah. We probably have time for one more question before it's time.
Yeah. There's a couple quick questions that I think kind of got answered all along the way. We actually kept up with a lot of these really, really well. So let's just see. Okay. Dungeon Monkeys asked, have you ever played a character that became something other than what you initially intended for them?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Is there an example of when, as a player, you found a character became something other than what you initially intended for them? I think that's what it is. You found a character became something other than what you imagined for them originally.
All my characters become something different than I originally imagined for them. And I'm going to tell you something that I have a tendency to do when I'm designing my characters for long-term campaigns. So if you haven't heard this before, my long-term characters are usually much more serious in their tone than my one-shot characters, who are usually more lighthearted. Mm-hmm. But whenever I'm making my serious character, I forget to account for their comedy. And their comedy comes the first time I roll a 1. And that's always what happens. Is Sebastian was supposed to be a cocky know-it-all who walked into any room thinking that he was going to outdo anybody in any situation, until he got stabbed 20 times and was crawling on the floor screaming, and Pluto had to come rescue him, and then he cowered behind Pluto, and suddenly he's somebody different. He's not the cocky, arrogant mage that he was in the first episode. And Wilhelm was supposed to be brave, bold, and stood up to any problem with dedication and severity that stuck to his rules. But if you watch, what I started to realize is Wilhelm's a regular guy dealing with stuff that is so irregular that it is actually he's trying to be brave, but it's hard when he's facing horrible monsters to be like, I've never seen this before. What do I do? And I started to really play with that. And then in his failures, in his tripping and falling, getting caught, getting injured, falling into horrible messes that he then had to dig his way out of, he changes. And all of my characters end up going through this process. They end up becoming a more well-rounded character, I think, in the process.
So here's actually a cool way to help you get characters that develop. There's this great question that one should always ask oneself of, who am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going? And when you create a character, those are 3 great questions to ask. Who is this person? Where did they come from? And who might they become? And in so doing, you might actually like ask, what are the people that your character might be after their adventures or during their adventures? What are the dramatic questions and the tensions and the choices that your character will have to make? Because ultimately, choice is the foundation of a role-playing game, is making choices. And so the most interesting choice of all is, who is your character going to be? And that question is multi-layered, because your character at the beginning of a campaign is a certain character, but then they're going to be somebody else. But you, when you make that character, can actually lay out some of the possibilities. And you should. Maybe the question of your character is, is your character going to become worn down and cynical by their adventures? Or are they going to stay optimistic and stay brave? Are they going to be driven to madness? Or are they going to learn how to overcome? Are they going to change their definitions of what it means to trust others? Will they learn to trust other people again? Will they learn that lesson of, with great power comes great responsibility? What are the lessons that your character needs to learn? Actually, that's a great question, is what is the lesson that your character needs to learn? What is the thing that they don't know? What is the thing that they need to be challenged by? And those are all ways to open your mind to that development. And if you open your mind really further and say, well, I'm open to my character discovering this during the campaign. I'm open to the idea that maybe my character will succeed or fail at being this person or this person. And then you really get to play what if with Dungeons & Dragons.
And I think that is a great statement to close off this Q&A with, because I think that was really... I think what we just did there is that was a really encapsulating idea that I think sums up the general idea of this whole night. Is really what it comes down to, is the wonderful decision of who your character is going to be. And I think that that's the defining statement.
Yeah. And how to develop that.
And actually we've been brainstorming and prepping some videos that actually deal with a lot of these topics. And we want to do a few more, a few less mechanical videos just coming up. We have a few ideas for some more, getting into D&D passionately sort of ideas. And I think that's something we actually really enjoy talking about, is at the end of the day, this game is about feeling rewarded in the characters that you created and deciding what avenue of Dungeons and Dragons in the game of possibilities, what is going to be the most rewarding experience for you.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to decide.
And for some people, all this character development is a bunch of hooey, and they just want to kick ass and take names.
And that's fun.
And that's fun.
Rewarding.
And that's fun and reward. Exactly. So there you go. Awesome. So thank you all so much to both of our Twitch chat folks that were joining us tonight, and our amazing patrons for sending us your questions. We do this every month. We usually put up about a week before on our Patreon page, where our patrons can submit questions. We have an amazing Discord community that is exclusive to our Patreon supporters, where you can chat with us about DRAKKENHEIM, about character building, about how the cool video game that you just played is awesome. Share photos of your miniatures that you're painting and ask for DM advice. So if you're interested in joining that community, check us out at patreon.com/dungeon_dudes. All the links are in the description below. And once again, a big thank you from the bottom of our hearts to all of our Patreon supporters for both your creative contributions and your ongoing support.
Absolutely. And I will also say that if you are just tuning in for the first time in our Twitch channel, we are the Dungeon Dudes. We offer advice videos for dungeon masters and players. And you can find that all at Dungeon Dudes, youtube.com/dungeon or YouTube. What?
youtube.com/dungeon dudes.
There it is. There's underscores on some of them. There's not on others. it's confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely check us out. And also, we do have a live stream. So if you want to see us play D&D, we have our whole first season up on YouTube. It's called Dungeons of Drakkenheim. There's season 2 is half finished. It's called Shadows of Drakkenheim. And currently we are taking a bit of a break from season 2 to do what we call the Untold Tales of Drakkenheim. And you can check all of that out on YouTube, or you can catch us Tuesday nights on this Twitch channel, twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern. You might also be interested, as a final note, to hear that our campaign setting is going to become a book. And we are working very, very hard. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games, and we are working hard to create the Drakkenheim book campaign setting for 5th edition. And hopefully we are going to be able to tell you more about that soon. You can join a mailing list so that when we do have updates, you get notified about them instantly. And that is at drakkenheim.com. You can find that. Anything else?
That's I think that's all. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we will see you next time
in the dungeon.
In the dungeon.